Welcome back, GRD131, Graphic Design 1, and possibly GRD132, Typography, to our type intro. And again, this is a very informal kind of presentation. I didn't practice a big PowerPoint of this. I'm just going over some categories of fonts and some basic terminology. And in the first video, I went over the serif and the sans serif fonts. And if you forget everything that I mentioned, just remember that serifs have the feet on the bottom and sans serifs don't. And serifs have the kind of curl up kind of italic style, where sans serif usually is more on an angle, although we mentioned in this one there are some small differences here between the italic font and the regular kind of Roman font. And also sometimes sans serif fonts, the italic version is called oblique, if you ever hear that. That just means it's on an angle. It's not really changing the style of the font. And now we're going to mention the third category, which is slab serif. It has serifs on it, so it's a serif font, but they're kind of big and blocky. I'll zoom into here just so you can see them. And where you'll see slab serifs, a lot of times if you think of athletic wear, if you think of collegiate wear, if you go into any kind of college bookstore, sports teams and things like that, you'll see more of this kind of look. It's like a collegiate kind of look. And now this isn't very thick right now, but they can get very thick. They have a very heavy style here. And if you put these in all caps, they could be like with team logos and things like that. Actually, these originated from being like kind of a display or decorative kind of font in advertising. You see them more and more on the web now. Usually they weren't used for anything other than kind of display or headline kind of faces, but now you'll even see some body copy. You'll see these more for headlines on the web, as there's more fonts available that are kind of made for the screen, especially in our graphic Google fonts here that we're working with. Roboto is a very popular font in the Google font library, and they have a nice little style here. So they have everything from thin through regular through to real heavy. So they have a nice family of fonts, so they're very usable and they're very readable as well. So they're not just for sportswear anymore, or collegiate stuff for sports bars and things like that. They have a little more uses now, but typically their characteristics is they have kind of square serifs on them. Usually they have very little bracketing, meaning there's very little transition from the serif up to the stroke. Usually they're very kind of blocked at the bottom. And you can see it here on the A, you can see it at the top of the B, on the bottom of the L, sticking out from the L, sticking out from the stroke of the B. So that's what you'll typically see with slab serif. There's not too much to say about slab serif. You're not going to use it a whole lot, even though on the web it's used more for body copy, it's used more for headlines, but we use it more in a decorative nature, I guess. It's not the everyday fonts like serif and sans serif would be, but it's worth mentioning this type of font. And there are font styles that kind of cross over. Some of these are very close to being a slab serif. There's some slab serifs that are very close to being just a regular serif font. So there's crossover here, but they are considered either an Egyptian or slab serif font. Sometimes square serif is another term that you'll see for these. And you'll usually recognize them by their big square serifs. Even typewriter style fonts and a Courier and American Typewriter are considered slab serif, even though they're used more in a decorative kind of nature. All right, so that's the third category of font. We have serif, sans serif, slab serif. That's 3. And now I'm going to move on to script. And I put a whole bunch of script fonts here just to show you that there's all different kinds of script fonts. They can be typefaces where their letter forms connect. And some of these connect. I'll zoom in here so you can see this a little bit better. This Great Vibes font, this is the name of the typeface here, Great Vibes. You can see they connect. They actually connect here. And some of the letters connect, and they don't all connect, but script, these letters connect. The T does not connect. And that's kind of more of a formal type font. You might see this on an invitation or formal kind of documentation, something like that. This is more a calligraphic kind of style here. I mentioned doing things with a calligraphic pen. This kind of has that look of Zaf Chancery, if you ever heard of some of those fonts that you might see on your computer all the time. This is more a calligraphic kind of look, but these aren't connected. But typically what I'll put in the script category is any fonts that look kind of handwritten, really. So they could be connecting, they could be formal, they could be casual, they could be something that just looks like handwriting, like technical writing. There's a Tecton font that is very technical looking that you might see on like blueprints and things like that. And some of these can be very decorative, used decorative in nature, and some of them can be used for invitation body copy. But usually you're not going to see a lot of body copy in these fonts. They're used for logos, they're used for headlines, they're used to grab your attention. Some of them are meant to look very nostalgic or retro. Some of them are meant to look like handwritten kind of letter forms. You'll see a lot of daycares and things like that using kid-looking fonts. Even Comic Sans. I always make fun of people using Comic Sans all the time. You should never use Comic Sans. But people will use that because it's kind of a kid-looking font. So anything that looks handwritten, that could be written with a pencil or pen, something that could be put together with a brush. Some of these are more brushy. Some of them are more casual, but I guess a good way to look at script fonts is either they're formal or they're casual. Now, out of these, this is casual, this is casual, this is a little more casual. They're all pretty much casual for the most part. These are more formal. The ones up here, this is formal. And you probably won't use formal ones very much. Other than like a wedding invitation, formal scripts aren't very readable for a lot of body copies. So a lot of times you'll be using more casual kind of scripts because they're fun and you can do logos with them and they stand out and they're very bold. Using formal scripts, you'll use a lot less. You'll find a lot of casual scripts, and in the categories here, if you just go here and start scrolling around, you'll find all kinds of script fonts, really cool fonts, a lot more in the Gravid kind of Google font catalog than you're going to find on your regular computer. You might have a handful on your computer, but in here you'll find at least, 20, 30 different script fonts that are pretty cool. So I just grabbed a couple here, but just to show a variety. So those are script fonts, and that's pretty much what you'll see. Something that either looks handwritten, they're connected, or they look painterly or anything like that. Casual, formal, or kind of the breakdown that we'll kind of look at for script fonts. And the last category that we'll look at here, these are decorative fonts. And again, you could go through the Gravid font list or the Google font list and find tons of these. They could be anything. Some of these are only in capital letters, like this Luckiest Guy. This is kind of, I don't know what's going on. It's called Modak, and I don't know, it looks like a little belly there or something. But they're very distinctive. That looks like a smile. They have little smiles. And they're usually used for headlines, for logos, for attention-grabbing kind of copy. You're not going to use it for body copy, really, ever. Here's kind of a goth-looking font that looks more kind of Gothic or black letter or Old English. In one of the videos, I talk about Old English in the typography reading, but they could be anything. They don't have to be really distinctive either. They just don't fit with other stuff. There could be fonts that just have one little thing about them that kind of stands out. They don't have to be like novelty. Some of them are novelty. You'll find some with like, icicles on them and like Halloween looking fonts and, like these, how they have these real rough edges. It's very goth looking, but some just are just really unique letter forms that are neat to just grab attention just in their own way. And they're just not meant to use in body copy. So these are decorative. They're also called display fonts, so that you would use them in display, use them for headlines. They were first used in advertising, back in the 20s and 30s and things like that. That's where they first started using more display fonts to get people's attention. If you had something in a newspaper, they started using these real bold kind of attention-grabbing fonts to really get people's attention away from the body copy. So these are meant to look different than body copy. They're not meant to look like serif or anything like that. And keep in mind, there's crossover. There could be script fonts that are used for decorative nature. There could be fonts in the decorative category which have serifs on them. It doesn't mean it's in the serif category. It doesn't mean you could look at this and say, oh, well, that's a sans serif font. There's no serifs. Yeah, but there's only one weight of font. You couldn't really use this for body copy. If you think of a sans serif font, usually you're going to see kind of a regular, maybe an oblique, maybe a bold version of it. But these sometimes are just, they only have one face and they're only meant to be decorative. They're only meant for display. There's usually not a family of fonts in these. They're usually just meant to use kind of one off. So that's decorative. So if we look at all these fonts here, we have serif, sans serif, slab serif, we have script, and then we have decorative. So those are the 5 categories that we want to be familiar with as we start working with typography. So I just did this as kind of an informal kind of introduction to this, to kind of go along with the reading. This is kind of what I do in class if we talk about fonts. And we're going to do exercises with these fonts and be matching them up and be pairing them up. But I just wanted to give you a start there on some of these fonts just to help you out with the reading. So that's the end of our type categories for Graphic Design 1 or typography.